So on to detect and analyze. This is where most people jump to. They forget about the planning stage and to the fun part on the fly. We want to understand what signs or triggers may be an incident. That whole Q&A that I did earlier about is this an incident should be a clue to you that not everything is obviously an incident. We should describe that as well as we can and understand it when we see it. That is probably the most difficult aspect of incident response. And we'll talk later today about some of those more subtle clues. We need to identify and name the artifacts. If there are log file entries, we need to capture those. If there are files deposited, we need to capture those, identify what they are. We need to figure out what it is that this incident created that we can archive and analyze later or just talk about later. So just understanding where those files and logs are, understanding how to go looking for them, what tools you might have available to find them is an important piece here. Determine the scope. This sometimes is not entirely possible. For example, when did it start? We have an infection, we have something happening on the network that we see is not what we were hoping for. How long has it been going on? Do we have log files that'll tell us that? Do we have any tools that'll let us know? Potentially not. How many systems were affected? What data was involved? Hopefully one of the things you've done prior to this in planning was classify your data and categorize systems so you know as you're able to determine scope for different data types that were affected and different systems that were affected, you get a clue about what your actual response should be. If it's a kiosk in the lobby, maybe you don't care so much. Analyze the incident. What is the effect? What is the impact of it? And interestingly, what is there new risk implied? So based on the fact that we were attacked successfully, do we now understand new risks that we had not identified before? Do we need to loop that back into our risk analysis? Usually, yes. Often, in many situations, this will be our patch management program is actually not quite as complete as we thought it was. And while we thought we had complete coverage, it turns out this department or these servers or these systems were not well covered in that plan. So it's not working like we expected. It's a new risk and we need to deal with that. And prioritize response. Figure out what to fix next. In some cases, I've seen infectious agents invading a network. In one case, actually a hospital. And it was a virulent disease of networks that actually spread itself very rapidly. We had to prioritize medical systems because, in fact, it was on the verge of affecting medical care. So what do you deal with first? And then, how do you tell management, no, your personal laptop is not on my list for today? And notify as needed. This is both internal and external. Notification of internal folks is something you should probably do early. It's likely already described in your plan, and in larger organizations has to follow very careful guidelines for how that happens. External notification is even more problematic in terms of what do you tell people on the outside and when, or if you tell them at all. This is often regulated. There's laws involved. 46 of the 50 states actually have notification laws in terms of security breach in some cases. So again, should be part of the plan, and this is the stage at which you would actually do that. So containment, eradication, and recovery are sort of the last piece here. Not quite the last piece, but we'll talk about that. We need to make it stop. In some cases, we need to make it stop right away, and the temptation is to just start unplugging stuff. That may not be your best avenue. At this point, ancient book, Cliff Stahl's Cuckoo's Egg, actually talks about him tracking and tracing an attacker for quite a long time in order to understand who it was and what they were doing. I can't remember the publication date, I believe it was in the 80s. Make the damage stop. This could be internal or external damage or both. If it's damaging your own internal systems, you have some leeway as to when you make it stop and what the liability may be. If an infection or an incident of some nature is actually using your network to hurt others, you may be more constrained. The liabilities may actually be mounting as you make these decisions. Again, the temptation is to act as quickly as possible. Try to act just as quickly as possible and not more quickly. You need to make intelligent decisions, not destroy evidence, and not overreach. You may, in fact, affect others adversely by taking action too quickly, not well understood. So as I say, there could be forensic interests to recover, or maybe not. There is, again, if you have forensic training or background in information assurance, there's a temptation to believe that every incident should be investigated, that we should go try to prosecute these people. Successful prosecutions are rare. The ability to track bad people and the bad things they're doing is extremely difficult and resource intensive. We spend millions of dollars sometimes trying to figure out who an individual was that perpetrated a virus, and in the end to discover that they're out of our reach, that we can't touch them, or that we just don't have enough evidence to find out who they were in the first place. It's not always a foregone conclusion that there will be forensic evidence that we need to recover. Be mindful of business impact. Shutting off the main Amazon.com web server because you think something might be going wrong costs an unbelievable amount of money per minute. I won't quote the number, but I've read it, and it's quite a sizable sum. The person who pulled the switch on that without sufficient evidence will not be employed. Again, think about damage to others if you do not stop something. I've seen ongoing attacks before that were damaging others more than ourselves. Gather evidence as you might, identify your desired outcome. What is it that management specifically wants to have happen at the end of this incident? If there are legal, forensically suitable methods required, it's usually time to pull in an outsider unless you have in-house expertise that knows how to use the tools properly. You can actually quickly damage evidence to the point of being unusable by just collecting it improperly. If you know how to do it, by all means go forward. If you don't, do not go down that path without further guidance. If the outcomes are operational outcomes, just get what you need and move on. Often, what management will ask you to do is make it stop and get us back online. That is the most common request. And if that's their desire and there are no other legal implications, that's what you do. Eliminate the threat or ongoing compromise, get back to normal business. So, the most often forgotten piece of incident response. After action. Do a postmortem analysis of what happened. If you do not take the step, if you do not pay attention to what just happened to you and try to figure out the whys and wherefores, do root cause analysis, you will have it happen to you again. And in the modern internet era, if you still have the vulnerability, you'll have it happen again and again and again. So it's critical that you look at what just occurred. The very strong temptation is, oh my goodness, it's over. They're done, they're out of here, we're back online. None of the artifacts of this are still extant. They're all gone, and I can get back to my job. Do not do that. Force people to sit down to the table, talk about the incident, and understand what's occurred. Utilize the information that you've collected. You've collected log files, you've collected potentially disk images, you've collected other kinds of things that might tell you a little more about what happened. You may want to archive those things, you may want to take a closer look. Do we want to prosecute? Are there evidentiary controls that we need to invoke? Is there a chain of evidence issue? Have we spoken to law enforcement such that we actually may be, at this point, considered to be an agent of law enforcement? You may have run across this concept before, but once you start speaking with law enforcement in many venues, it can be considered that you are now acting as an agent of those law enforcement in data collection, and you're subject to the same rules they are. Prior to speaking to them, the rules are far more relaxed. You can do anything you would do as a normal corporation. So it's a fine line. Make sure you cross it when you're ready to cross it, not before. If the incident was a threat, or non-attack in nature, just make sure your normal data retention applies, that you've actually captured things as a corporation typically would. And we're ready to talk a little bit about detection. Most incidents start out fairly small. The reason is big flashy attacks that take your web server down. Things that have huge impact and that you see aren't profitable to the attacker unless their goal is to take you down. If their goal is to extort, if their goal is to gather information from your systems and steal plans or pre-patent data or anything like that, what they want to do is they want to be quiet as possible. And some of the attacks in more recent times are extremely quiet. We'll talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. So if they're looking to get your data, they're kind of going to come in as quietly as possible. Hopefully, from their perspective, you won't see anything. Of the things that we typically think about, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If they affect availability, you'll notice that. That's a no-brainer. Sometimes you'll notice compromise of confidentiality, usually when it loops back around as information used to attack you further or exposed on the internet somewhere. Compromise of integrity can go unnoticed for years. If you think about it, somebody jumping into your database and just changing everybody's birth date by a month will not show up in any normal check. Jumping in there and changing their credit score, probably not. They won't see it necessarily unless they do a check. You won't see it. You'll just assume that credit score was as it was supposed to be. These are the kinds of stealthy attacks that primarily don't get noticed. So TrustWave's 2012 Global Security Report shows an average of about 173 days. Most attackers are in your environment before you notice. So for about 3 months, a little over 3 months, you're owned by somebody and you have no idea. That's average. More recent report, Mandiant's 2013 APT1 report, shows that the named attackers in APT1 were in for an average of 356 days before they were detected. These attackers were extremely sophisticated, and they were specifically there not to disrupt, but to steal, to gather information, intelligence, and in some cases, national intelligence. A hacker living on your network for a year is a very frightening proposition, and one that you need to be prepared to deal with.